Yes, and hello again from your Uncle Lucifer, or rather hello from the electronically altered voice of our producer, Neil Fox, speaking into his microphone somewhere in Los Angeles, California, early in the year 2012. Generally, we like starting these videos with a funny skit that makes fun of some YouTube detractor or other, but this time around the subject is so heavy that we shall forestall our usual fare. Now and then, you see, we have mentioned a patient of ours who believes she hears the voice of Jack the Ripper, and we would like to explore that further here. Hardly the stuff of comedy, now is it? Besides, today's talk will touch on a public video exchange that Fox had not too long ago with the Luciferian Satanist author Michael+W+Ford. It was a civil exchange, so we will maintain all due decorum out of consideration for how well that went. Even though I must point out what our regular viewers already know, the Lucifer series is at quite some distance from Ford's thinking. Nonetheless, as popularizers go, Ford's approach to Satanism constitutes an advance beyond that of author Anton LaVey and something a good deal more sophisticated than that of Michael A. Aquino. Having said that, I must add what Aleister Crowley would no doubt affirm if he were alive today, and which Fox has affirmed repeatedly over the last year to those who are beginning to listen here in L.A. What is called Satanas, that which one labels Satanas out there in realms very few really understand, this mass projection, this volatile archetypal imprint, this virtual collective thought form, Satanas, is not, nor has he, she ever been, or ever will be, a Satanist. Who has ears to hear, let them hear.
Shalom Ishwar Mem Ein Power.
Now I have committed to 3 videos that very few viewers can entirely relate to: Lucifer on Solaris, Lucifer on Addiction, and Lucifer on the Shadow, wherein I simulate a conversation with a fictional psychiatrist who is supposed to be treating a patient named Bashara Durian. Miss Durian is said to be my host. I channel through her and have conversations with her, a skeptical psychiatrist who assumes I am simply a fragment of his patient's multiple personality disorder. Call it a neo-Socratic dialogue that is probably inappropriate for YouTube's pop cultural landscape, where things need to be spelled out plainly and simply. But sometimes I do not speak plainly and simply. But let me give it a try here. I will begin by mentioning that if I was to simplify things for everybody, I would say the producer of our videos, Neil Fox, based the character of our make-believe patient in part on someone we call Magdalene, who is a real YouTuber who hears voices and hallucinates and lives in her dreams and fantasies and comments regularly on any number of videos put out by Satanists. Of course, as I am always saying, the Lucifer series is not Satanist. We are instead the Wicca of the goddess and the serpent in the most metaphoric but still psychically focused sense. But for a time, Magdalene was as interested in the Lucifer series as the Lucifer series was interested in her. It came to grief, of course. She does not make for a very stable online friend. But it was interesting while it lasted. Now, Magdalene is very set on defending a Satanist who goes on quite a bit about the rising predator's soul. And the predator most on my mind these last 100+ years has been my own misbegotten serial killer, the titular father of all serial killers, a character named Charlie, known to the press of his time, and ever since, as Jack the Ripper. Ironically, Fox has often entertained the notion that in the midst of all her other voices, Magdalene really does hear Charlie's voice and that of his friend Hank.
Now, back in the early days of the Lucifer series, I had already written a very fictional manuscript about Jack the Ripper, and I didn't think of it as anything but a story. But when I started talking to Magdalene, some things came out of her that I personally construed as possibly actually confirming elements of my story. And anyone is in their rights to say, well, you're just reading that into it. And Magdalene herself is free to say that I was just reading that into it, okay? But I have to say this. It wasn't just the Ripper. I have a number of Lucifer manuscripts on my hard drive that are a lot more serious than the Ripper story, which was a non-Lucifer story. But I have manuscripts narrated by Lucifer that do relate to a channel in my life. And I talk about that in Prophecies of Lucifer 6 and its two follow-ups, and Lucifer on Channeling, which should have to be read as a thread. Anyways, Magdalene's been on my mind because she was bent out about my video response to Michael+W+Ford. Okay? And listen, the only reason I made those two videos about Ford was that he had become a point of contention between me and someone I know locally, someone I'll call Maury Autry. This is one of the most erudite Satanists I've ever met, and I was almost shocked by his mistaken impression of Michael. I just didn't think he was reading Michael very closely. This is someone who's really very bright. Satanists are not known to be that up on the occult, on what's hidden in Crowley, on what's hidden in a lot of things that you might read. And I wanted to clear the air about that because it had gotten a little tense in a conversation I had with him at a party, and that's not the best place to have involved discussions. And so I thought I'd make these videos, and it went over pretty well. And so, hey, for those of you who know me and know who I mean by Maury Autry here in LA, everything's fine.
Reincarnation is just one idea among many about the nature of life and death. It is, in fact, a clumsy model that gets at something unfathomable about the illusory nature of time and space. And because it is unprovable, one must be as discreet with it as one is humble. But in one sense, I would suggest that the possibility that Magdalene was once a woman known to the Ripper may not be as absurd as it might sound to skeptics. Magdalene's fantasies hit upon several key features of my manuscripts when she herself had no knowledge of those manuscripts. It was the most singular coincidence Fox has ever encountered on YouTube. So, for the sake of discussion, let us allow that Magdalene might have once called herself Ginger or Mary Jane Kelly. The only real name that this long-dead person ever had that has survived is that of her husband, a Mr. Davies. The rest was just what a creature of the streets took to calling herself in those days. One alias after another was Ginger's way of insulating herself from her shame, to be called, by any other name than the one she had grown up with. Now, any student of the Ripper murders understands that Mary Jane Kelly is widely held to have been Jack's final victim. But if memory serves me correctly, I must contradict this. If anything, Jack was Ginger's victim in the end. In their world, you see, a world of poverty and despair and much bitterness and alienation, a thoroughgoing breeding ground for a disgruntled slave mentality, a victim psychology, the restless, scheming, hostile mindset of a prisoner. One was either predator or prey, and ultimately Ginger, to her credit, chose not to be the prey. But unless one can get past this false dichotomy in life, one's cycle will be forever stuck in such abject fixation of it that the narrowness of one's concept, the myopia, will finally lapse into such psychological and psychic incoherence that it bears a good deal of discussion. Besides, you will burn out in the end. Whether Ginger had her moment turning the tables on the dangerous killer changed nothing about the life of alcoholism that would drain her dry in the end and find her withdrawn and quiet and longing despairingly for the fire in the belly that she had finally lost to drink.
Now, as far as Jack goes, hey, this guy was no more free than a rat in a maze looking for the cheese. We don't know who he was, but we know what he was. He was a psychopath, and that says it all about old Jack. All right? And he was probably a psychopath, and there's an FBI profile out about the case and the MO, and it surmises what kind of person he must have been. All right? And he was a predator, and being in and of itself, being a predator is nothing. If you need a little bit of that in your life to round yourself out, okay. But of course, this is taking it too far, and it's taking it too far to cite the historical examples that Michael+W+Ford extols when he's pointing to some historical figure as, a self-deified person, like Emperor Nero or Emperor Antiochus IV, both mass-murdering tyrants who mismanaged their empires and ended in abject failure. Okay. Second cousins to old Jack. Now, I get that for most Satanists, the predator spirit thing is about not letting anything get between you and your goal, or what you want to achieve or have for yourself. Having the focus of a hunter, a predator. It's figurative, psychological. I understand. But when you cite as your role model someone like Nero or Antiochus IV, those are actual historical personalities that anyone can look up and do a little bit of study on, and you can decide for yourself whether or not those legacies ended in failure or in success. And any historian is going to tell you they ended in failure. I'm sorry. And anyone who wants to rebut me on that in a video, let them do it. You can try. Let's see you do it. Simple as that. So enough said about that. For the Lucifer series, you have a shadow self, and getting in touch with that shadow self is not about being ruled by the shadow. It's just that there's, for every personality, there's an opposite personality, and that opposite personality has strengths that you don't have, and it has weaknesses that you don't have. Your ego is like a photograph, and that other ego is like a negative to that photograph. Now, bringing this together is not about succumbing to the shadow and being dominated by it. It's about bringing its strengths together with your strengths and synthesizing this into a new kind of personality. This happened for me when I was young. I went from being an inhibited, buttoned-up kind of guy to someone who was a lot more coming out of himself. And it was great. And it's not the whole story to anybody. It's not the whole answer to anything. But it's a good beginning. More improvisational and creative self. It has nothing to do with being a serial killer and nothing to do with being a tyrant or a world conqueror.